There was a time when I woke up in the morning and everything felt strangely meaningless. Not because something bad had happened, and not because I had lost something big. It's just that I didn't feel anything at all. The things that used to excite me suddenly became dull. The relationships that once brought me joy now felt like mere social exchanges. Everything continued as usual. I still went to work, still met people, still laughed and talked. But inside me, a vast emptiness was quietly expanding, impossible to name, impossible to fill. I used to think I was falling into a crisis. I tried to avoid that feeling by staying busy through entertainment, through meaningless conversations. But the more I ran, the more exhausted I became. Because that emptiness didn't go away. It only receded into the background, waiting for me to stop and face it. And then on a very quiet night, when I no longer had the strength to hold it all together, I sat down, took a deep breath, and allowed myself to touch that emptiness. No resistance, no explanations, just simply stayed with it. At that moment, something fragile, yet powerful, began to bloom inside me. A feeling that maybe I wasn't wrong like I used to think. Maybe this wasn't a sign of collapse, but the opening of a door leading to something deeper, something more real. And when I began to explore, I realized that this feeling of emptiness was a very clear sign that I was entering a phase of spiritual evolution. Evolution isn't about rising above or becoming special. It's about shedding, about returning. It's the phase where things that no longer align begin to fall away, so the soul can live in its true essence. And that process is often not as radiant as we imagine. It's quiet, subtle, and sometimes very empty. If you're also feeling what I once felt, if there's a space in your heart that no one seems to understand, then maybe you're not falling behind, but being invited to go deeper within yourself. Because sometimes emptiness is not an ending, but the beginning of an entirely new journey. When I first began walking the path of spiritual awakening, I thought I would feel increasingly clear, grounded, and filled with something sacred and profound. But ironically, one of the very first and longest-lasting experiences I had to face was emptiness. A feeling of being drained. No more motivation. No more emotion. No longer knowing who I was, where I was going, or why the things that once held meaning suddenly felt so dull. At first, I was terrified of that feeling. I thought I had taken a wrong turn, that maybe I had lost my faith, or that I was regressing instead of evolving. But then I started to realize this emptiness wasn't a sign of something wrong, but the natural result of a deep internal shedding. When a snake sheds its skin, it must separate from the old layer by itself. That skin which once protected it, which once felt essential, now becomes too tight, no longer fitting. To grow it must crawl out of the old, and that moment is when it is most bare, most vulnerable, and most empty. I realized my journey was exactly like that. I had lived with roles, labels, and habits I believed were me. I was the friendly one, the one who always smiled, the one who knew what I wanted. But when awakening began, those layers of identity started falling away. I no longer resonated with the job I once loved. The conversations I used to enjoy now felt boring. The relationships I once cherished now seemed like they belonged to a different world. Bit by bit, I was unraveling, but had no idea what I was becoming. The space between the old me and the me becoming was pure emptiness. And the hardest part, there's no guidebook for it, no map. No one can tell you how long it will last or what waits on the other side. All I could do was stay with it, not try to fill it, not try to rush through it, not try to perform a role just to feel less empty. Just simply be with the unraveling. And then when I stopped trying to escape the emptiness, I began to feel something gentle, as if that very emptiness was cleaning out space inside me. It removed what was false. It swept away desires that no longer served me. It cleared the thick dust of expectations, comparisons, and control. I gradually understood emptiness isn't lack. It's a sacred cleansing. So if you're feeling what I once felt, if you wake up each morning and feel no drive, if everything around you that once sparked joy now feels like a shell, know that you are not lost. You are in a spiritual metamorphosis. You are clearing out, making room for a new version of yourself, one that is more refined, more authentic, and more free. And just like a house that feels hollow after everything old has been cleared out, there will be a moment where you feel wide open. But from that space, you can begin again, this time with conscious choice, not unconscious routine. That emptiness helps you see who you are when you no longer cling to any identity. And that perhaps is what true evolution really means. When emptiness completely took over me, the first thing I noticed was that the things that once excited me, that once made me feel alive, no longer had any effect. A movie that used to make me laugh out loud now felt like images passing by. A song that once moved me deeply now sounded hollow. My regular morning coffee conversations with loved ones, even the relationships I once cherished, they all began to feel distant, unable to reach me anymore. I began to feel as if I were standing behind thick glass, watching life unfold without being able to participate. At first, I tried to fill that emptiness with all the familiar ways. I turned to social media to see what others were doing. I threw myself into work to stay busy and forget. I shopped, went out, looked for new experiences, hoping they would stir something inside, but none of it worked. The more I searched outside, the emptier I felt. It was a strange feeling, as if the more I consumed, the hungrier I became. The more I chased stimulation, the more drained my soul felt. And in that moment, I had to stop. I had to accept a truth. Nothing outside of me could fill the void I was feeling. No one, nothing, no experience, because this emptiness wasn't physical. It was the emptiness of identity, of beliefs, of how I used to define myself. It didn't need to be filled. It needed to be heard. I began turning inward, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. For the first time in years, I sat down without any goals. I didn't wish to get better, to find peace, or to figure something out. I simply sat with the emptiness, and something strange happened. When I stopped trying to feel alive, I started to feel truly alive. Not from intense emotions, not from novelty, but simply because I was there, fully present. I realized that emptiness wasn't something to run from, but something that made me stop, so I could hear the sounds. I usually ignored my heartbeat, my breath, the sensation of my body being still. Stop, so I could notice the constant stream of thoughts in my head. Stop, so I could see where I'd been running, what I'd been chasing, and whether it was even worth it. In that silence, I slowly realized that by no longer looking outward, I had returned to my inner center where all the answers had always been. From that moment on, I no longer needed something special to make the day meaningful. I could sit alone in a small room, watch sunlight slip through the curtain, and feel my heart soften. I could walk in the park, no headphones, no phone, just feeling each step, each breeze, and feel like I was being embraced by life itself. I began to come back to life from within the heart of emptiness, and then I understood I hadn't really been living before. I had only been reacting to society's expectations, to my family's beliefs, to habits of chasing fleeting emotions. But when those things no longer touched me, I had the precious chance to choose again, to choose a conscious life instead of being driven by default. And it was emptiness that created the space I needed to hear the voice of my own soul. There was nothing left to search for outside, because what I needed most had always been inside me. But it wasn't until everything else stopped working that I found the courage to turn inward and face it. And I understood emptiness didn't come to leave me lost. It came to show me the real way forward. For a long time, I carried a strong belief that spiritual evolution was a journey of reaching something higher. I imagined an ideal version of myself, more peaceful, more understanding, more enlightened, filled with love and light. I read books, listen to teachings, practice meditation, hoping that each day would bring me closer to that state. But then amidst meditation sessions that no longer sparked emotion, books that felt distant no matter how much I read, and long empty days with nothing left to hold on to, I began to realize a paradox. Spirituality isn't about adding, it's about releasing. I let go of the belief that I had to become someone special. Let go of the desire to be enlightened like someone I once admired. Even let go of the intention to reach a perfect state. And it was in that moment I began to see clearly. True evolution never comes from trying to add more, but from the courage to let go of what no longer aligns with my soul. The emptiness I was experiencing became the clearest evidence of that. I didn't gain anything in the process of awakening. On the contrary, I lost a lot. I lost the excitement for my old life, lost the ability to pretend, lost relationships that no longer resonated, lost the layers that once protected me from my true emotions. And in that loss, I slowly touched the essence of who I am, something that no words could ever define. When I stopped trying to become, I started to simply be myself, raw and unfiltered. Not perfect, but real. I could feel sadness without blaming myself, feel lost without fear, know nothing at all, and still feel like I was on the right path. Because now I understand evolution isn't about rising higher, it's about going deeper. And each time I let go of something that wasn't me, I came closer to the purest core of my soul. I used to think a spiritually evolved person was always peaceful, never angry, never anxious. But I was wrong. A truly evolving soul is someone who dares to look at their anger and anxiety without running. Someone who no longer hides their shadow just to be accepted. Someone who accepts they are still on the path and that there is no such thing as a final destination. Spiritual evolution to me now is a return to simplicity, to presence, to what is humble and sincere. It carries no glory, requires no labels, seeks no validation. It's a process of slowly unraveling the illusions created by the ego, even the illusion of spirituality itself. And through that process, emptiness is no longer the enemy, but a quiet companion reminding me that what fades away without hurting me was never truly needed. So if you feel like you're falling behind just because you've lost inspiration, lost energy, lost the urge to do anything, don't rush to conclusions. Maybe you're not falling back. Maybe you're letting go of what no longer fits. Maybe it's not depletion, but purification. Not that you're lost, but that you're peeling away an old map. And one day, you'll realize the map you needed most was the gentle whisper from your own heart. Evolution isn't a flashy state. It's a deeply human, deeply real, and deeply quiet process. And sometimes, only when you accept losing what once felt essential, do you finally see you didn't need that much to truly live. I used to think that emptiness was the end, a place where everything was taken away, where I was left with nothing but a lingering sense of loss. But then when I stayed with that state long enough, without trying to escape or resist, I began to realize emptiness is not the ending, but a new beginning, a fertile ground where real life starts to grow again. And for that to happen, I had to learn how to be patient with the void, like a piece of land after harvest, needing time to rest. Before planting the next season, my soul needed silence to heal itself, to recover, and to restructure. The emptiness within me was a sign that the old soil had been tilled. Roots that no longer fit had been pulled out. And now, the only thing left to do was nothing at all except to trust. This was an incredibly hard lesson for me, because in this world, where everything is tied to action achievement and speed doing nothing, made me feel like I was wasting time, like I was falling behind. But the soul does not operate on the same timeline as the physical world. It has its own rhythm, and sometimes silence is the most essential condition for a new self to be conceived within. In that emptiness, I was no longer pulled by the noise outside. And then something magical happened. I began to hear very small, very delicate, but deeply true things. A soft breeze brushing past my ear made me emotional. A ray of sunlight slanting through the window was enough to open my heart. I started living more slowly and more deeply. I no longer needed big waves or intense movements. Just one moment of true presence was enough to make me feel truly alive. I also realized that emptiness taught me a different kind of love, unconditional love for myself. Before I loved myself, when I achieved something, when I was good, when I felt meaningful. Now, I learned to love myself even when I didn't know who I was, even when I wasn't doing anything, even when I simply existed. That love no longer depended on accomplishment, but on presence. And from there, I felt reborn, not because I had completely changed, but because I had returned. The state of emptiness also allowed me to observe my entire belief system that I had carried my whole life. The should be, this must be, that have to be, that kind of person, all started to reveal themselves more clearly in the stillness of my inner world. And without being controlled by external pressures, I could finally ask myself, what do I truly want? What still feels right for me? And what do I need to release to be free? These questions aren't easy to answer, but they are the foundation for a new self being built, one no longer confined by fear or expectations. I began to feel that rebirth doesn't come like an explosion, but like a thin mist seeping in slowly, silently. Each day I lived a little more consciously. Each breath I became a little more present. Each conversation I listened a little more sincerely. Nothing grand was happening, but every small detail in my daily life began to carry new meaning. And that is true rebirth, not loud, not dramatic, but deep, real, and profoundly human. So, if you are in that empty space, if you feel like you've been paused in the middle of life's flow, please know that you are not being left behind. You are simply being nurtured in silence so that when the time comes, you will emerge with a more open heart, a clearer mind, and a self that has been reborn from the very ground you once thought was barren. I used to see emptiness as a problem to solve, as if something was wrong with me. But after moving through many layers of thought, after I stopped trying to explain and simply accepted the feeling, I began to see clearly. Emptiness is not a flaw. It's a signal, and not just a signal, but a sacred invitation. An invitation for me to step into the next stage of my soul's evolution. We live in a world that always looks outward. Knowledge out there, achievement out there, happiness out there, goals and meaning also somewhere out there. But when I began to awaken, everything out there suddenly lost its weight. The things that once made me feel valuable no longer worked. Success, relationships, recognition, all seemed to be dismantled piece by piece, and the only thing left was the void. But that void became the only space quiet enough for me to hear the real calling from within. Emptiness. The way I feel, it is the buffer zone between two versions of myself. An old self dissolving and a new self being formed, though not yet clearly shaped. It's like dawn before the sun rises. You can't see anything clearly yet, but you know something is definitely coming. Emptiness is a phase shift, the moment when the old operating system inside me is being replaced by one that's more refined, more relaxed, more profound. Then I realized every time I felt emptiness in life, whether after a loss, a breakup, or an unexpected turn, it always led to inner shifts that I could never return from. I was no longer the same. I had new perspectives, new feelings, new ways to love, new ways to live. It might not have been clear at first, but over time, I saw myself growing in ways I could never have reached without that emptiness. Emptiness also taught me more is not always better. In silence, I learned what's truly worth keeping. In absence, I saw what was enough. And in my deepest loneliness, I discovered I still had myself. That may sound simple, but it was a huge leap in awareness, because spiritual evolution is not about learning more. It's about becoming lighter, freer, closer to the truth. And emptiness, though it may feel painful, is the state that brings me closest to that truth. On this journey, I also learned that emptiness doesn't always need to be filled. Sometimes it needs to be kept intact, not to be endured, but to be listened to and observed. Observed for how I react, how I run away, how I cling, and then gently let each of those go. And when I could hold that emptiness without panic, I began to touch a very different depth, a place where the ego no longer controls and the soul begins to speak. I also noticed that in emptiness, beauty becomes simpler. A kind look, a bird's song, a quiet afternoon, all became more precious than ever. There was no longer a need for anything grand to feel complete. Just being here, just breathing, just being myself, raw, unstriving, unpolished. And from that emptiness was no longer the pit I feared falling into. It became sacred ground where I could be reborn in the most authentic way. So, if you are feeling empty, don't rush to label it as negative. Don't assume you're off track or falling behind. On the contrary, you may be closer than ever to a giant leap in your inner journey. You may be going through the most powerful transformation your soul has ever experienced. And even though it may have no fireworks, no applause, it is proof that you are evolving in the deepest, quietest, and truest way possible. Now, looking back at the entire journey, through those days of such emptiness that I felt like I was slowly dissolving, I'm no longer afraid like I once was. On the contrary, I feel grateful. grateful that emptiness came, that it took away what was no longer needed, that it peeled off the layers I once mistook for who I was. I know now, if that phase hadn't happened, I would have kept living in the same old loop, repeating ways of being that no longer aligned with my heart, and continuing to build a life shaped by expectations, not by truth. Now more than ever, I understand. Emptiness is not loss. It's space being made for something new, something pure, something more aligned to arrive. It is the pause between two pieces of music, the stillness of night before a radiant dawn, the soul's rest after a long journey of pretending and holding on. If you're in that state, if you feel lost, directionless, if nothing seems to spark your motivation anymore, don't rush to conclude that you're broken or falling behind. See it instead as a sacred buffer, an invitation to return inward to the place where no one can define you, where you can hear your own voice without it being drowned out by others. Allow yourself to pause. Allow yourself to not know. Allow yourself to be unclear. Allow yourself to simply be in the process. And during that time, treat yourself with all the kindness and patience you can give, because your soul doesn't need you to try to be better. It only needs you to be here fully honestly. Spiritual evolution doesn't happen in flashy moments, but in quiet, unseen spaces where no one is watching. And you, even in the seemingly directionless void, may be closer than ever to a profound transformation. So trust that emptiness. Trust yourself. Because sometimes, when you feel like there's nothing left to hold on to, that's exactly when you begin to return to your purest self. And from there, a new journey will begin, this time not based on anything external, but rooted in the gentle light within you.